All right, ladies and gentlemen, let's tackle lesson 27 on identifying misleading representations of data. If you can go ahead and open up your books to page 159, you can follow along and take a look at the graphs that I'm talking about. If you don't, you're going to miss out on those. So, things to look for. So if we look at example 1, jumps in the axis. The graph in example 1, you'll see that has that little funky little jaggedness there. That is a jump in the graph, which is totally acceptable, but it can lead to misrepresentation in your data. You'll notice if you look at this data from January through June, it looks like you had a huge increase, when in all reality, you had probably 250 out of 900 in your data. So it's going to show a bigger increase than it actually had. This also could be misleading if people don't notice that it starts at a different number than 0. Okay, too big or too little a scale. If you look at example 2, we have a huge scale on the left axis, the y-axis. It shows that it's going from 0 to 500 to 1,000 to 1,500. This makes our data look really small, that there's not a lot of difference between these, but in all fact, there could be a lot of difference, but the small scale doesn't allow for that. If you turn the page and look at the circle graph on the top of page 160, vague labels. That circle graph just says sandwiches, and then it lists them. So we don't know anything about the sandwiches here by the title. Is this the sandwiches that are purchased most frequently? Is this how many are made each day? Is there other types of sandwiches? So very vague. Okay, so some simple things that could be misleading. All right, the graph at the right shows the number of miles a car is traveled each year. Explain why the graph may be misleading. So if we look at the graph at the bottom of page 160 with A, it says miles driven. Well, that title is really misleading because it doesn't talk about that it's the number of miles that a car has traveled. So the title just says miles driven, so that could represent miles driven by a single person, by a family, by a company, by the car, by the number of cars that are driven on a day in a car lot. Who knows? It's just not specific, so that's misleading. Another thing is if you look at the graph, that the y-axis does not start at 0, it starts right up at 10,000. So that again is that misleads because it can show that a lot of miles are driven. All right, let's look at B. The graph below shows baking temperatures of various foods. Explain why the graph may be misleading. Well, if we look here, we see that our temperature increments on the left side, the y-axis, is really big. They jump up by 150. So this makes it look like the temperatures are really not that far apart, where we have ones that start at 300 and ones that go almost up to 450. So they have kind of a variety in that there. All right, C, the circle graph below shows the number of some kinds of dogs that were sold by the pet store. If we look there, the types of dogs sold, the one thing that we don't know is does it represent all of the dogs that were there or just the types of dogs sold on a certain day? Kind of vague in our title. And the last one covers these 3 bullet points. A salesperson created the graph at the right to display the number of products sold each month. Explain why the graph may be misleading. Well, we see that there's a jump in the graph and it goes up to 200 right away. And now if you notice, it looks, just by glance, it looks like his sales increased a lot. But if we look at our lowest one, which is just above 240, and our highest one, which is just above 320, there's really only like a 60, 80 dollar difference. So his sales didn't really even increase by $100. So that's going to be definitely misleading there. Okay. E, what conclusion might be made from the graph? Well, that he sold his sales increased a lot when really they didn't even increase by $100. Okay. Why might he have made that graph? Well, to make it look like he's done more than he did. All right, make a graph of the sales of the data that's not misleading. So if we do this and we start at 0, and then 50, 100, 150, 200. Oh, I'm not even close enough with all that space. Okay, I'm just going to keep going right into the words. 250, 300, 350. All right, so if we look, his sales starts just less than 250, it goes down, and then it kind of increases, but it doesn't even increase that much. So just a simple graph there. All right, thanks, ladies and gentlemen.